The afternoon sun was beating down on the streets of Los Angeles, but inside the massive, air-conditioned movie studio, it felt like a different world. Keanu Reeves stood near the edge of the set, holding a prop weapon that felt heavier than usual in his hand. Around him, the crew was rushing back and forth, moving cables, adjusting bright lights, and shouting instructions that echoed off the high walls. It was a busy day, just like any other day in his life for the past few decades. He was known as the guy who could do anything, the man who didn't need a stunt double for the hard hits, the one who would stay until every shot was perfect. But today, something was wrong. Keanu shifted his weight from one foot to the other, trying to find a comfortable position. A dull ache had settled in his side a few weeks ago. At first, it was just a nuisance, like a muscle he might have pulled while training. He was used to pain. In his line of work, waking up sore was part of the job description. He usually just stretched a bit more, drank some water, and ignored it. He thought it would go away on its own. But this time, the pain didn't leave. Instead, it started to grow sharper. It was no longer just a background feeling. It was becoming a constant, throbbing reminder that something wasn't right. He looked across the set at the director, who was talking excitedly about the next angle. Keanu nodded, trying to look focused. He didn't want to be the one to hold everything up. He had a reputation for being professional, for being easy to work with, and for never complaining. The idea of stopping the production because of a stomach ache seemed ridiculous to him. He felt like he could just push through it, finish the scene, and deal with it later. "All right, everyone, places," the first assistant director yelled out. Keanu took a deep breath and stepped into his mark. The action call rang out. He moved, running across the concrete floor, dodging obstacles just like he had done 1,000 times before. But as he made a sharp turn, a sudden bolt of pain shot through his abdomen. It was so strong that it almost made him lose his balance. He stumbled slightly but managed to catch himself, turning the stumble into part of the character's movement. Nobody else seemed to notice. To them, it looked like just another realistic fall. He hit the ground hard and stayed there for a moment, waiting for the cut command. While he lay on the cold floor waiting for the scene to end, he closed his eyes for a split second. The pain was pulsing now, loud and demanding. He realized with a sinking feeling in his gut that he couldn't pretend this wasn't happening anymore. His body, which had always been his most reliable tool, was suddenly betraying him. He felt a wave of dizziness wash over him, not from the exertion, but from the sheer intensity of the discomfort. "Cut, that was amazing, Keanu. Let's reset for the next one," the director's voice came over the speakers. Keanu pushed himself up slowly. He winced as he stood, biting the inside of his cheek to keep from making a sound. He knew he couldn't do another take, not like this. If he tried to run again, he might really hurt himself, or worse, he might pass out in the middle of the shot. He walked over to the director, his face pale but calm. "Hey," Keanu said quietly, keeping his voice low so the rest of the crew wouldn't hear. "I need a minute. Actually, I think I need to stop for the day." The director looked surprised, seeing the look in Keanu's eyes. He knew Keanu wasn't the type to ask for a break unless it was serious. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, just not feeling right," Keanu admitted. It was hard for him to say it. He felt a strange mix of embarrassment and fear. He was the action hero. He wasn't supposed to break. He didn't wait for a long conversation. He signaled to his assistant, a young woman who was always nearby with a water bottle and a phone. She walked over, looking concerned as she saw him clutching his side slightly. "I need to go to the hospital," he told her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not an emergency, but I need to get checked out, now." The assistant nodded immediately, her face turning serious. She didn't ask questions. She just sprang into action, arranging for a car to be brought around to the back exit. Keanu didn't want to make a scene. He didn't want an ambulance with flashing lights arriving at the front gate. That would cause a panic, and the paparazzi would have a field day. He just wanted to slip away quietly, deal with the pain, and figure out what was going on. He walked slowly through the maze of equipment and trailers, keeping his head down. He waved briefly at a few crew members who called out his name, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He felt like he was moving in slow motion, while the world around him sped up. The noise of the set, the banging, the shouting, the music, seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the pounding of his own heart in his ears. Outside, the California sun was bright, but it offered no warmth. He stepped into the back seat of a black sedan that had been pulled up near a metal side gate. The glass was tinted dark, shielding him from the outside world. As the car pulled away from the curb, leaving the chaos of the movie set behind, Keanu leaned his head back against the leather seat. He closed his eyes and took a shallow breath, trying to calm the storm raging in his stomach. He thought about all the times he had played characters who got hurt and kept going. In movies, pain was just a plot point. It was makeup and fake blood, but this was real. It was messy and scary and didn't care about the script. The drive to the medical center felt longer than it actually was. He watched the city blur past through the window, tall buildings, busy sidewalks, people going about their normal lives. He wondered how many of them were hiding a pain that nobody else could see. He had always been a private person, keeping his grief and his struggles to himself, dealing with them in the quiet of his own mind. But this was different. This was physical. It was a problem he couldn't think his way out of. He needed doctors, he needed machines, he needed help. When the car finally stopped at the entrance of a small, private medical facility, Keanu felt a surge of anxiety. He wasn't afraid of the doctors, but he was afraid of what they might find. For years, he had treated his body like a machine, fueling it with whatever was needed to get the job done, pushing it past its limits, and expecting it to just keep running. He had taken his health for granted. Now, staring at the clean, white sliding doors of the entrance, he realized that he was only human, and humans have limits. He opened the door and stepped out. The air smelled of antiseptic and car exhaust. He walked toward the entrance, his steps heavy. He wasn't running toward an explosion or fighting a bad guy. He was walking into a mystery about his own life. The pain was still there, a steady companion, whispering to him that his life was about to change. He pushed the button, the doors slid open, and he stepped inside, leaving the bright sunlight behind for the sterile, humming quiet of the hospital hallway. He had no idea that the routine visit he was about to have would turn into a battle for his future. But for now, he just focused on putting one foot in front of the other, ready to face whatever the doctors had to tell him. The inside of the medical center felt completely different from the chaotic energy of the movie set he had just left. It was quiet here, the kind of heavy silence that makes you aware of your own breathing. The air smelled sharp and clean, a mix of antiseptic and floor wax, a scent that instantly makes people feel anxious whether they want to admit it or not. Keanu walked slowly down the long hallway, his boots making a soft squeaking sound on the polished linoleum floor. He kept his head low, the brim of his baseball cap pulled down to cover his face, not out of arrogance, but out of a desire to disappear. He wasn't a movie star right now, he was just a patient in pain. He checked in at the front desk where the receptionist typed efficiently on her keyboard. She recognized him immediately, everyone does. But she was professional enough to keep her cool, merely handing him a clipboard with some forms to sign. Keanu took the clipboard and found a plastic chair in the corner of the waiting room. He sat down heavily, the ache in his side flaring up as he settled into the seat. Looking around the room, he saw a few other people. An elderly man holding a tissue, a younger woman biting her lip as she stared at her phone. They all looked worried. It was the universal look of the hospital waiting room, a place where time seems to stand still, and the only thing that matters is what the doctors will say. After what felt like an eternity, though it was only about 20 minutes, a nurse with kind eyes and a clipboard opened the frosted glass partition. "Keanu," she called out softly. He stood up, grabbing his jacket, and followed her through a doorway that led to the examination rooms. The hallway here was dimmer. The walls painted a soothing shade of beige that was probably meant to be calming, but just felt sterile. They passed several doors before she stopped at one and gestured for him to go inside. "Here we are. The doctor will be with you shortly," she said. "You can change into this gown. Just leave it open in the back." She handed him a folded piece of blue cloth and pointed to a small curtain in the corner. Keanu nodded and took the gown. As the nurse closed the main door, the room suddenly felt very small. It was a standard exam room, not much bigger than a bathroom closet. In the center was the examination table, covered in that crinkly paper that makes a loud noise every time you move on it. Against the wall was a metal sink and a cabinet filled with medical supplies. A computer screen glowed in the corner, casting a blue light on the otherwise dull room. Keanu walked behind the curtain and took off his jacket. He folded it neatly and placed it on a chair, along with his boots and his socks. He undressed slowly, his movements stiff and careful. Every time he twisted his torso to pull his shirt over his head, the sharp pain in his abdomen reminded him why he was here. He felt vulnerable in a way he hadn't felt in a long time. On a movie set, even when he was in costume, he felt in control. He knew the script, he knew the moves, but here he was just a body waiting to be inspected. He had no control over what the doctors would find. He pulled the blue gown on, tying the strings at the back as best as he could. It felt flimsy and cold against his skin. He stepped out from behind the curtain and walked over to the examination table. He sat down on the edge, the paper underneath him crinkling loudly in the quiet room. He put his feet up on the stirrups, then pulled them back, not wanting to lie down just yet. He sat swinging his legs slightly, looking at the anatomical charts on the wall, a diagram of a human skeleton, a picture of the human heart. It was strange to think that all those complex systems were working inside him right now, possibly failing him without him knowing. He sat there for a long time. In a hospital, time moves differently. 5 minutes feels like an hour. He found himself staring at a small crack in the paint on the wall, his mind racing. He thought about the people he loved, the projects he was working on, and the life he had built. He always tried to live in the present moment, to appreciate the now. But it is hard not to worry about the future when you are sitting in a paper gown waiting for a diagnosis. Finally, there was a gentle knock on the door, and it opened before he could even answer. A man in a white coat walked in. He was older, with silver hair and glasses that sat low on his nose. He had a calm, reassuring face, the kind of face you want to see when you are scared. "Hi, I'm Dr. Evans," the doctor said, extending his hand. He didn't make a big deal about Keanu being famous. He just shook his hand firmly and professionally. "I hear you've been having some persistent pain." Keanu nodded, shaking the doctor's hand. "Yeah, it's in my side. It's been getting worse." "All right, let's take a look," Dr. Evans said. He pulled a rolling stool over and sat down in front of Keanu. "Lie back for me, please." Keanu lay back on the table, the paper crinkling again. He stared up at the bright ceiling lights, squinting slightly. He felt exposed. The doctor began to press gently on his stomach with his warm hands. He pressed on the left side, then the right. Keanu stayed quiet, breathing steadily. But when the doctor pressed on a specific spot on the right side of his abdomen, Keanu couldn't help but flinch. He gasped slightly, his muscles tightening reflexively. "Sorry," Keanu whispered. "No need to apologize," Dr. Evans said, his voice serious now. He stopped pressing and noted something on his chart. "That is definitely tender, it's not muscular, Keanu. The muscles aren't guarding the way they do with a strain. This feels deeper." The doctor stood up and walked over to the sink to wash his hands. He turned off the water and dried them carefully, thinking. "I don't want to guess," he said, turning back to face the table. "Given how long this has been going on and the intensity of the pain you're describing, we shouldn't ignore this. I want to get a better look inside. We're going to need to run some scans. A CT scan, maybe an ultrasound, just to be safe." Keanu sat up slowly, the paper sticking to his back. He felt a lump form in his throat. Is it really bad?" he asked, his voice sounding small. Dr. Evans looked at him with empathy. "I don't know yet, that's why we test. It's better to be thorough. We need to rule things out. It's probably just something that needs a little medication and rest, but we have to be sure." A technician came into the room a few minutes later with a wheelchair. "We're going to take you down to imaging," she said cheerfully, trying to lighten the mood. Keanu wanted to walk, but he knew better than to argue with hospital protocol. He sat in the wheelchair and was wheeled out of the room. As they moved through the corridors, he saw snippets of other lives through open doors. People hooked up to machines, doctors talking to families, the hustle and bustle of the medical world. It felt surreal. He felt like he was watching a movie where he was the main character, but he didn't know the genre. Was this a drama, a thriller? Or would it turn out to be a comedy where the problem was small and easily fixed? They arrived at the imaging department. The room was large and cold, dominated by a massive white machine shaped like a giant donut. The CT scanner hummed with a low, technological energy. The technician helped him transfer from the wheelchair to the narrow bed that slides into the machine. He had to lie very still. "Okay, just hold your breath when I tell you and let it out when I say," the technician's voice came over the intercom. Keanu gripped the sides of the bed. The machine began to whirl and click. The bed slowly slid into the opening of the donut. He was inside the machine now, surrounded by white plastic. He stared straight up, focusing on a small sticker placed on the inside of the casing to give patients something to look at. He felt claustrophobic for a second, but he forced himself to breathe. He thought of it like a meditation. Breathe in, hold, breathe out. The machine moved him back and forth, taking pictures of the inside of his body. He closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he tried to stay positive. He tried to tell himself that he was fine, that he was just being cautious. But deep down, a heavy fear was settling in his chest. The doctor's face had been too calm, too professional. There was a gravity in his voice that hinted this wasn't just a simple stomach ache. When the scan was finally over, he was wheeled back to his small room. They told him he had to wait for the radiologist to look at the pictures and for Dr. Evans to come back with the results. So he waited. He sat on the edge of the bed again, now back in his street clothes. He felt tired. The adrenaline from the pain and the anxiety was wearing off, leaving him drained. He pulled out his phone but didn't call anyone. He didn't want to worry anyone until he knew what was wrong. He just scrolled through random news headlines without really reading them, his mind far away. He looked at the clock on the wall. The second hand ticked by loudly. Tick, tick. Tick, each tick felt like a hammer blow to his nerves. He felt a strange sense of isolation. In the movies, the hero waits for news with a team of supporters around him. In real life, you wait alone in a beige room with a sink and a poster of a skeleton. It is a lonely experience being a patient. You are entirely dependent on the next person to walk through that door, to tell you what your future looks like. He stood up and paced the small length of the room, 3 steps forward, turn, 3 steps back. He looked out the small window in the door, seeing the nurses stationed down the hall. Everyone was working. Everyone was moving. He felt stuck in a pause button. Then he saw Dr. Evans walking down the hall. The doctor had a tablet in his hand and was looking at it intently. He stopped at the nurse's station for a moment, said something to the nurse, and then looked up toward Keanu's door. The expression on the doctor's face wasn't the carefree look of someone bringing good news. His brow was furrowed, his lips pressed into a thin line. He looked serious. He looked concerned. Keanu stopped pacing and felt his heart drop. He watched as the doctor started walking toward the room. This was it, the moment where the routine checkup ended and the reality began. The handle turned, the door pushed open, and Dr. Evans stepped inside, closing the door firmly behind him. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Keanu took a deep breath and looked at the doctor, bracing himself for the words that were about to come. Dr. Evans walked into the small room, and the air seemed to get heavier immediately. He wasn't smiling anymore. The friendly, reassuring look he had earlier was replaced by a focused, serious expression that made Keanu's stomach tighten even more. The doctor held a tablet in his hand, gripping it a little too tightly, and he didn't say hello right away. He just walked over to the counter and clicked a button on the wall to dim the lights. "Keanu, please have a seat," Dr. Evans said softly, nodding toward the examination table. Keanu sat down, the paper crinkling loudly under him again, a sound that suddenly seemed very annoying. He watched as the doctor turned on a computer monitor mounted on the wall. The screen flickered to life, casting a blue, ghostly glow over the room. "Doctor." Evans tapped the screen a few times, and suddenly an image appeared. It was a black and white picture, looking like a foggy landscape of clouds and shadows. It took Keanu a moment to realize he was looking at the inside of his own body. "I've reviewed the CT scan," Dr. Evans began, turning to face him. "And I've also consulted with a radiologist who specializes in abdominal imaging. We wanted to be absolutely sure before we brought you back in here." Keanu nodded slowly, his hands resting on his knees. He felt his heart beating a little faster, but he tried to keep his face calm. "Okay, what do you see, doctor?" Evans pointed a pen at the screen, tapping a specific area in the center of the gray swirls. "Right here. Do you see this shadow, this darker area?" Keanu squinted at the screen. It just looked like a blob to him. "Yeah, I see it. What is it?" It's not a hernia and it's not a pulled muscle, the doctor said. His voice was steady, but there was a weight to it that made Keanu lean in closer. That is a mass. It's a growth on your pancreas. The words hung in the air like smoke. Mass. Growth. Keanu stared at the black and white shape. It looked so small on the screen, barely a few inches wide, yet it felt like it was taking up the entire room. He had expected to hear about a cyst or maybe an ulcer, something treatable with pills and rest. He hadn't prepared himself for the word mass. Is it cancer? Keanu asked. His voice didn't sound like his own. It sounded flat, distant. Dr. Evans took a deep breath and let it out slowly. That is the big question. I'm not going to lie to you, Keanu. The appearance, the location, and the way it is affecting the surrounding tissues. It is concerning. It has characteristics that we don't like to see. It looks suspicious. Keanu felt a cold chill wash over him, starting from his neck and running down to his toes. He looked away from the screen and down at the floor. He thought about the word suspicious. In a movie, that means a trap is coming. In real life, in a hospital, it means your life might be in danger. We need to do a biopsy, doctor. Evans continued, stepping closer. We need to take a tiny sample of the tissue with a needle to look at the cells under a microscope. That is the only way to know for sure what we are dealing with. It could be benign, meaning it's not cancer, but given the scan, we have to proceed as if it is serious until proven otherwise. Keanu looked back at the monitor. He felt a strange sense of detachment. He was looking at a picture of a problem, but he couldn't feel it directly. The pain he had felt for weeks was suddenly given a name and a face. It wasn't just a mystery ache anymore. It was an invader. It was something growing inside him that shouldn't be there. How long do I have to wait? Keanu asked, trying to focus on the practical steps. For the biopsy? We can schedule it for tomorrow morning, the doctor said. I don't want to wait. Given your symptoms and what we see on this screen, time is important. We need to get ahead of this. The doctor paused for a moment and looked Keanu in the eye. I know this is a lot to take in. You came here thinking you just needed some pain relief. I'm sorry it turned out to be more complex, but I want you to know that we are going to take care of this. You are in the right place. Keanu nodded. He appreciated the doctor's honesty. He didn't want sugarcoating. He wanted the facts even if they were scary. Okay, let's do it, doctor. Evans gave him a pat on the shoulder and then left the room to arrange the schedule. Keanu was left alone again with the glowing monitor. He stood up and walked closer to the screen. He looked at the dark shadow again. It was strange to think that this little thing was causing so much trouble. He had faced explosions, car crashes, and fights in his career, but they were all fake. They were all scripted. This was real. There was no script here. There was no director yelling cut if things went wrong. He turned off the monitor and the room went back to its dim, beige quietness. He sat back down on the table and put his head in his hands. For a moment, he just let himself sit with the fear. He thought about his life. He thought about the people who relied on him. He thought about all the things he still wanted to do. The reality of his own mortality was staring him in the face. We all live like we have forever, like our bodies are permanent machines that will just keep running. But seeing that mass on the screen was a harsh reminder that everything is fragile. One day you are running across a movie set, and the next day you are staring at a shadow on a screen, wondering how much time you have left. A nurse came in a little while later to give him instructions for the next day. She was kind and gentle, explaining that he couldn't eat anything after midnight. She handed him a pamphlet about the procedure, but Keanu barely looked at it. He already knew the drill. You show up, you let them put a needle in you, and you hope for the best. He walked out of the hospital a while later. The sun was starting to go down, casting long shadows across the parking lot. He got into the waiting car, but the drive home felt different than the drive there. Earlier, there was anxiety. Now there was a heavy, settled dread. He watched the city lights start to flicker on as the car moved through the traffic. People were walking their dogs, going to dinner, laughing. The world was still turning. Nobody knew that his world had just tilted on its axis. When he got home, the house was quiet, too quiet. He walked in and dropped his keys on the table. Usually this silence was peaceful. Tonight it felt loud. He poured himself a glass of water and stood by the window looking out at the dark backyard. He touched his side right where the mass was. He couldn't feel it from the outside, but he knew it was there. He realized that he couldn't keep this a secret forever. He would have to tell people. He would have to make plans. But tonight, he just needed to let it sink in. He wasn't just an actor playing a tough guy. He was a man with a serious health problem. The invincibility he felt on screen was an illusion. In this quiet room, with only the hum of the refrigerator for company, he felt incredibly small and incredibly human. The everything that the doctor had hinted at wasn't just a medical diagnosis. It was a wake-up call. The way he saw himself, the way he lived his life, it was all going to change. The scan had shown him a shadow, but that shadow was shining a light on everything else. He took a sip of water and closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. He knew the fight of his life was just beginning, and for the first time in a long time. He didn't know how the movie would end. The morning after the biopsy felt like the longest morning of Keanu's life. He sat in a different room now, one that was slightly larger but felt even more confining. This wasn't just an exam room. It was a consultation space where people went to hear news that changed their lives. The chairs were softer, the table was made of wood instead of metal, and there were boxes of tissues placed strategically on the corner of the desk. All small signs that pointed toward the kind of conversation that was about to happen. Keanu sat with his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together tightly. He was staring at the floor pattern, tracing the lines of the tiles with his eyes, trying to keep his mind blank. But it was impossible. The fear was like a static noise in his head that wouldn't turn off. He had spent the entire night before staring at his ceiling, unable to sleep, wondering what the cells looked like under the microscope. Were they angry? Were they calm? Were they destroyable? When the door clicked open, Keanu didn't jump. He was too exhausted for sudden movements. Dr. Evans walked in, followed by another doctor, a woman with kind eyes and a gray blazer. She was a specialist, an oncologist. The presence of a second doctor confirmed what Keanu had been dreading since he saw the shadow on the screen. This wasn't a simple fix anymore. "Keanu, doctor," Evans said softly as he pulled out a chair. "This is Dr. Harris. She is the best in the field, and I wanted her here to go over the results with us." Keanu looked up and nodded at Dr. Harris. He tried to smile, but his facial muscles felt frozen. "Good to meet you." "Likewise," she said gently. She sat down and opened a folder. She didn't waste time with small talk. She looked him directly in the eyes, her expression full of compassion but unyielding seriousness. "Keanu, the biopsy results came back. I'm not going to sugarcoat this, because you deserve to know exactly what we are facing. The mass is malignant. It is pancreatic cancer." The words hit the room like a heavy stone dropping into water. Malignant, cancer. Keanu let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for days. He unclasped his hands and rubbed his palms on his jeans. He had suspected it. He had prepared himself for it. But hearing it spoken out loud made it terrifyingly real. "Doctor." Harris continued, her voice steady and calm. "It is aggressive, and it is located in a difficult spot. However, the good news is that it appears to be contained. We caught it before it spread to the lymph nodes or the liver. That gives us a fighting chance, but we have to move fast. We can't just watch and wait. We need to be aggressive right back." She pulled out a diagram of the human anatomy and pointed to the pancreas. "We are going to recommend surgery, a complex procedure called the Whipple procedure. We will remove the head of the pancreas, part of the small intestine, and the bile duct. It is a major surgery, Keanu. It will take hours, and the recovery will be long and hard. It is not an easy road." Keanu looked at the diagram, seeing all the parts that would be cut away and reconnected. He thought about his body being opened up, organs being removed. It sounded violent and frightening. But as he sat there, listening to the medical terms and the risks, a strange sense of clarity began to cut through the fear. For years, Keanu had been the one to carry things for other people. He had carried grief for lost friends. He had carried the weight of movie productions, and he had always tried to be the strong one, the one who didn't complain. He had treated his own body like a tool to get the job done, ignoring the whispers of pain and the signals of exhaustion. He realized now that he had been running away from his own vulnerability. He thought that if he kept moving, the bad things wouldn't catch him. But here was the bad thing, growing inside him, fueled by the stress and the neglect he had subjected himself to. He realized that his resilience had a limit. He wasn't a superhero, he was flesh and blood. "If we don't do the surgery, what happens?" Keanu asked quietly. Dr. Harris didn't blink. The tumor will grow, it will block your digestive system, it will spread. We are talking about a timeline of months, not years. Surgery is our best and really our only option to cure this. Keanu nodded slowly. Then let's do it. Let's schedule it. The doctors looked slightly surprised at how quickly he agreed. Usually, patients needed time to process, to cry, to scream. Keanu just wanted to get on with it. He didn't want to sit in the waiting room of life anymore. He wanted to get into the ring and fight. After they left, giving him a moment to process and talk to his family, Keanu sat alone in the room again. The silence was back, but it felt different now. It wasn't the silence of anxiety, it was the silence of a decision made. He leaned back in the chair and looked out the window. The sun was shining, birds were flying, and the world was continuing on. He thought about his life outside these walls. He thought about the scripts he was reading, the people he worked with. He realized how much time he had spent worrying about things that didn't matter. He worried about box office numbers. He worried about what critics said. He worried about being good enough. Standing at the edge of a battle for his life, all of that seemed so small. It was dust. The only thing that mattered was the people he loved and the moments he had left. He realized that if he wanted to be there for those people, he had to fight for himself first. He had spent so long taking care of everyone else that he had forgotten to take care of the one person who mattered most, himself. A tear finally escaped, rolling down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away, he let it fall. It was a tear of release, of letting go of the idea that he had to be strong all the time. It was okay to be scared. It was okay to be broken. Because broken things could be fixed. He stood up and walked to the door. His hand hesitated on the handle for just a second. He took a deep breath, feeling the air fill his lungs. He was alive right now. He had a diagnosis, but he also had a plan. He had a team of doctors ready to help him. He had the will to fight. He opened the door and walked out into the hallway. His assistant was waiting there, looking anxious. She stood up when she saw him. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Keanu looked at her. He didn't smile, but his eyes were clear. "It's cancer," he said, "but we're going to take it out. I'm going to have surgery." She gasped and covered her mouth with her hand, tears springing to her eyes. She stepped forward to hug him, but he held up a hand gently. He wasn't rejecting her comfort, but he needed to stand on his own 2 feet right now. "I'm okay," he said, and he meant it. "I really am, but I need you to make some calls. I need to clear my schedule. I'm going to be away for a while." As he walked out of the hospital, the fresh air hit his face. He felt the weight of the diagnosis, but he also felt something else rising up to meet it. Strength. Not the fake strength of an action hero, but the real, quiet strength of a man who knows exactly what he is up against and decides to fight anyway. He got into the car, looking out at the city one more time. The fear was still there, hiding in the back of his mind, but it wasn't in charge anymore. He was. He was going to do whatever it took to heal. And for the first time in a long time, he was going to put himself first. The recovery was harder than any stunt he had ever performed. The surgery, while successful, left his body feeling like it had been broken apart and put back together again. For weeks, Keanu stayed in a quiet place, far away from the noise of the city and the flashing cameras of the paparazzi. There were no scripts to memorize, no heavy weights to lift, and no early morning calls. His days became simple, focused entirely on the basics of existence, sleeping, eating small meals, and walking slowly around the room to rebuild his strength. In the beginning, the pain was intense. It was a sharp, constant reminder of what his body had just gone through. But as the days turned into weeks, the sharpness faded into a dull ache, and then eventually into just a memory. He spent a lot of time looking out the window, watching the trees move in the wind. He used to hate being still. He used to think that if he wasn't working, he wasn't achieving anything. But now, stillness felt different. It felt necessary. He thought a lot about the scar that ran across his abdomen. It was hidden under his shirts, but he knew it was there. It was a permanent mark, a physical record of the battle he had fought inside that sterile hospital room. At first, he felt self-conscious about it, a sign of his weakness. But as he healed, he started to see it differently. It wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a sign of survival. It was proof that he had faced something terrifying and had come out the other side. During those long, quiet afternoons, Keanu did a lot of thinking about his past. He thought about the losses he had suffered in his life, the people he had loved who were no longer here. For a long time, he had carried that grief like a heavy stone in his pocket. He had used work to distract himself from the pain, pushing his body to the limit so he wouldn't have to feel the emptiness in his heart. But facing his own mortality had changed something in him. He realized that you cannot outrun pain by running faster. You have to stop, turn around, and face it. He understood now that his body wasn't just a machine for him to drive until it broke down. It was a home. It was the only place he truly had to live. He had spent so many years taking care of everyone else, being the rock for his friends and colleagues, that he had forgotten to be kind to himself. This illness had forced him to be selfish in a way he had never been before. He had to say no to people. He had to cancel plans. He had to rest. And surprisingly, the world didn't end because he took a break. The movies kept getting made. The sun kept rising. He learned that taking care of himself wasn't selfish, it was essential. If he didn't have his health, he couldn't be there for anyone else. When he finally returned to public life, people noticed a change. It wasn't that he looked drastically different, although he had lost some weight and moved a little more carefully. It was something in his eyes. The action hero intensity was still there, but it was softer now. It was layered with a deep sense of peace. When he smiled for the cameras, it didn't look like a posed gesture. It looked genuine. It looked like a man who was happy just to be standing there. In interviews, he didn't dwell on the grim details of the surgery, but he didn't hide the fact that he had been through a life-changing experience. He spoke openly about the importance of health and the need to listen to your body. He talked about how fragile life is and how we shouldn't waste a single moment of it. He told a reporter once that he used to think his strength came from his ability to endure pain without complaining. Now he knew that true strength came from admitting when you need help and having the courage to slow down. He started to live differently. He took roles that meant something to him, stories that had heart, rather than just big-budget action movies that required him to punish his body. He spent more time in nature, riding his motorcycle through the quiet canyons, feeling the wind on his face, appreciating the simple freedom of movement. He stopped sweating the small stuff. If a meeting ran late or a flight got delayed, he didn't get angry. He just used the time to breathe. The everything that had changed wasn't just his medical record, it was his soul. The fear of death had stripped away the ego and the vanity that often come with being a famous actor. What was left was just a human being who was grateful for every new morning. He appreciated the taste of his coffee in the morning. He appreciated the sound of his friends' laughter. He appreciated the feeling of taking a deep breath without pain. One evening, not long after he was fully cleared by his doctors, Keanu attended a small dinner party. It was a low-key gathering, just close friends in a backyard, sharing food and stories. At one point, the conversation turned to health and fitness, a common topic in Lowe's Angels. One of his friends was complaining about a minor injury and how frustrating it was to be sidelined. Keanu listened quietly. He took a sip of his water and then spoke up. His voice was soft, but everyone at the table stopped to listen. "I know it's hard," he said. "But trust me, your body is talking to you. You have to listen. Don't wait until it screams." He didn't tell them the whole story. He didn't need to. He just sat there looking healthy and alive, a living testament to his own advice. Later that night, as he stood by a fire pit, watching the flames dance, he touched his side gently where the scar was. He felt the warmth of the fire on his face and the cool night air on his skin. He felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had been given a second chance. The shadow on the screen that had terrified him had actually been a gift in a strange disguise. It had woken him up. It had forced him to stop running and start living. He realized that life wasn't about the big milestones or the awards or the money. It was about these small, perfect moments. It was about the quiet evenings with friends, the feeling of the sun on your face, and the simple, miraculous fact that his heart was still beating. He smiled to himself, a private, peaceful smile. He wasn't afraid anymore. He knew that life was fragile and could change in an instant. But instead of fearing the end, he was going to focus on loving the middle. He was going to take care of this fragile, beautiful body of his, and he was going to make sure that every day counted. He turned away from the fire and walked back toward his friends, his steps steady and sure. The nightmare was over, and his new life had just begun.